Hello, it's Bernadette again with By the Book Accounting, and today's tutorial is entitled Who Can I Claim? This is going to be a two-part segment. So the first video we're going to talk about qualifying dependents and what does that mean? So you are allowed to claim an exemption for each person that you claim on your tax return. And so a lot of times I get questions from clients asking who can I claim on my tax return. So this video is going to help you understand who can you claim. So there are two ways that you can claim a dependent on your tax return. They either need to be a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. In this video, we're going to focus mostly on, not mostly, we're going to focus on a qualifying child. Part two, we'll talk about qualifying relatives. So let's see, who is a qualifying child? In order for a person to be a qualifying child, they have to pass 5 tests. So there's a relationship test, an age test, a residency test, a support test, and the joint return test. So let's talk about those real quick. The relationship test, basically you need to be related. So it can be a son or a daughter, a stepchild, a foster child, a grandchild, any siblings, so brother, sister, half sisters, half brothers, stepsisters, stepbrothers. Those are all included, as well as nieces and nephews. So those, if they fall in that category, then they satisfy the relationship test. That's one of the 5. The second test is the age test. So if they're not a student, then they need to be under age 19. If they are a student, then they need to be under age 24. If they are permanently disabled, then any age. So if you have a 30-year-old child who's disabled, you can claim that child for their entire life. Age is determined by the last date of the year. So maybe they were 19, they turned 19. If they turn 19 December 30th, then they're too old. So you're always going to base their age based on the age that they were on the last day of the year. So that's the second test. The third test is the residency test. They must have lived with you more than half of the year. So temporary absences are okay. So if you have a student who is away at college, that they still are considered for tax purposes living in your home even though they're away at college, or maybe if they're studying abroad or something like that. Death and birth of a child. So if you have a child that dies in the year, you can still claim that child. So if the child dies, God forbid, on January 2nd, you can still claim the child as if the child were alive all year. And the same would be true is if you gave birth to a child. So if you gave birth to a child on December 31st, you can claim that child as if the child had been living with you for the entire year. So death and birth of a child. And the last thing with the residency test is children of divorced or separated parents. And I'll talk briefly about this, and more than likely we'll do a separate video because it gets a little bit more in detail. But typically the child is considered the qualifying child of the custodial parent. However, there are exceptions to the rule, and again, we'll talk about that in more detail. One thing I'll say is if the divorce decree or the separation arrangement states that the child is going to be claimed by the non-custodial parent, or if I've seen cases where parents may alternate and one parent claims the even years and the other parent claims the odd years, and so there are some exceptions to the rules when it comes to the residency test. Our next test is the support test. And in this test, in order for them to qualify as a qualifying child, the child cannot provide more than half or his or her support for that year. So let's say if it takes $5,000 to support the child for the entire year, and I know that's extremely low, but if it takes $5,000 to support the child and the child earns 3,000 and you pay the other two, then you don't pass the support test. But if we flip it and of that 5,000 you pay 3 and the child pays 2, then you satisfy the support test. The last test is the joint return test. So the child cannot file a joint return for the year. And that means that if the child is married, so sometimes, you may have grown children that live with you who may be married but they're not working. If they file a joint return only to claim a refund and they don't have any tax liability, then you can still claim them. Um, this also applies when you have a child who has a job. So some teenagers get jobs in high school or in college. If if the child passes the support test and they're filing their own return, you can still claim them. They would file what's called a dependent tax return. So you would still be able to claim them on your tax return. So I hope that helps you understand qualifying children. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please subscribe, like, or comment to this video. And you can find us on bythebookaccounting.com. Thanks again.